everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. It is just after 3 o'clock. Thank you all so much for coming, even those of you who I sort of twisted their arms into coming and learning about workflow tools. I'm a bit of an evangelist for workflow tools at the moment. This is a very short microphone. Let's go like that. So how many of you out there have actually heard of the project Workflow Tools? One hand, and he's a client. One, okay, all right, we got two. All right, so those of you coming in, this presentation is about workflow tools in general, but it's also about a project called Workflow Tools that attempts to encapsulate a whole bunch of best practices and best practice tools into one project to help us, or to help what I hope will become a new best practice in the Drupal community for deploying not only content but also code into production. How many out there are DevOps guys? Yeah. Just straight programmers? All right. Site builders and other. Okay, all right, so the presentation is going to be a little bit technical, but I think there's something for everyone to get out of it. And we're going to be talking about a lot of really cool tools, and we'll have a short demo at the end. Also, show of hands, how many people use Git on a daily basis? Excellent. SSH. Yahoo! All right, I see one of my former proteges there using Git and SSH on a regular basis, so that's great. Jenkins. All right, good. Yeah, that's a little bit more of a specialty tool. Yep, Bob in the back using Jenkins. That's great. All right, so we're going to be looking at how we can use all of these tools to form a new best practice for the community to keep ourselves from developing content and, I hope to God, not making code changes in production. All right? So first, a little bit about me. I work for Media Current. I'm a Drupal developer, and I don't have Twitter, so you can tweet at the company. That's the question. What is Workflow Tools, and why are we sitting in this room right now? So the first thing to get through your head is that Workflow Tools is not a module. Let me say that again. Workflow Tools is not a module. Okay, that's not entirely true. It is a module, however, it's a lot more than that. Okay, so there is a project at drupal.org/project/WF. And it is a module that you can download and install. But on its own, it does nothing. It takes a whole bunch of these tools, wraps them together, and then connects with other tools that you have installed in your DevOps environment, like Jenkins, to actually accomplish something. So it is something that that I and the maintainer and some other guys are promoting as a new best practice for medium to large and enterprise websites to use to push their content and code changes into production. So it's the icing on a 5-layer cake. It uses Git, including the Git module for Drupal. It uses SSH, including a custom module to interface with SSH and to create private keys and public keys and to use those for deploying code. It uses a lot of Drush, including some custom Drush commands. It relies on Jenkins or actually any continuous integration interface that you want to use. And it relies on the deploy module, which also relies on the UUID module, to migrate content and configuration from what you're going to see in a moment are these sandbox instances into your production, your dev, staging, and production sites. So a little bit of background on the project and sort of where this came about. So this guy named Dave Hall, he works at Pfizer, and he's working with Tim Holt of Acquia to develop this system that came out of their partnership to figure out a better way of a better workflow for Pfizer to deploy content. Now, Pfizer is a pharmaceuticals company, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of websites. They are huge. They are massive. And they've started implementing workflow tools on some of their new websites, and they're looking to retrofit all of their old websites, all of their existing websites, into this model so that they can have a streamlined workflow for deploying their content. Currently in Drupal, there is no one sort of golden best practice for deploying your content. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people do it really well, and some people don't do it very well. And especially for those sites that are kind of in between. You know, they're big enough to where developing content in production is going to cause some real problems. But they're not an enterprise level website where they have, you know, a Tim Holt and a Dave Hall to develop this custom workflow for deploying the content. And so they're kind of stuck. And they might have some decent DevOps guys that try to put together some Jenkins scripts, that try to work out their own way to deploy their changes. But what we want to do is sort of unify and say, kind of do what GitFlow did for the Drupal community of developers. Say, here is the way that a way that works for us, for our community. We know it works well, and here's a whole bunch of support and documentation to help you get started. And another reason why it's coming into fruition now is because a lot of the tools to make this possible are maturing, like the deploy module with UUID and the sort of popularization of Jenkins for CI. A lot of the tools are becoming more common and more available to Drupal developers. So we're not going to watch the entire presentation from Dave Hall and Tim Holt. I would love to. I thought about just coming here and just showing their presentation. I was in Prague a couple weeks ago, and I saw on the sheet of sessions for the day, I saw something that said, WF FTW at Pfizer. I said, what the hell is that? And I checked it out on the Drupalcon Prague website, and I saw something that I knew they were making stuff up. I said, there's no way that what they're saying in this presentation notes can be true. And so I went, and lo and behold, they had a live demo of it working right in front of my eyes. And so I was blown away, and from then on, I'm pretty much an evangelist at this point. And I'm going to Bad Camp next week, and I'll be talking with them some more about it there, and hopefully, working more on the project to make this a reality for the community. So here's the basic idea. This is the original way so this is kind of the model that we have right now that most Drupal developers will be familiar with. Code goes up, content comes down. Your developers, they work in a development instance or in their local instance. Code gets pushed up to staging, it gets tested, it gets reviewed, it gets approved, and it gets pushed up into production and deployed to production. Content may get produced on a sort of lateral server, a content server, but for the most part it's produced in production. Now if you're real fancy, you might use workbench moderation or some other tools that sort of help you preview content or create content without it being published and available to the public on your production server. But there's no way for people to be able to see that in context. That's not entirely true. There is some work being done out there on some other modules that make that possible, but the work is being done in production, and that's always risky. Because you might have administrators in there who are able to make configuration changes, making those in production. So what Workflow Tools proposes is that we have not only code, but also content coming up from the bottom. So you'll notice there's a new branch in there called integration. And I actually took this, this snapshot from the Prague presentation. I actually like to change that around and call it production staging dev. And then at the bottom, those would be individual jobs. And the way it works is there's an entire separate management website called the Workflow Tools Management Node running on a whatever box you want that manages the deployment of those dev instances or those job instances. And in that management node, you can have a developer or a content editor log in and create a new job. And what happens, I'm going to show you a live demo of this in a moment, is it actually spins up an entirely new instance with its own branch, its own database pulled from production, its own code base with the files directory rsync from production. It spins all that up and puts it in its own sandbox. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, what good does that do? Because what do you do with the content once it's developed there? Well, that's where the deploy module comes in. The deploy module has something called the auto deployment plan. And when you spin up an auto deployment plan, it tracks new content that gets created, existing content that gets edited, and you can even do some configuration changes with it. Now, it also tracks any changes made to the code base. So any configuration you've captured into features or any other code that's been made by developers, it tracks that because it has its own branch, its own Git branch. So both your code and your content are being managed in this sandbox. And you could even have a developer check out that code base locally, work on it there, and then push up the changes. And then once it gets approved from that sandbox, it gets the code base, that Git branch, gets merged into integration, and all of the content changes get moved from that sandbox instance into the integration website. So then you've got it sitting on integration, and it's ready for review and approval to get pushed up to the next step, which is staging. And from there, the same process to move from staging to production. Now, integration is more of an entry point for probably more of the technical side, the developers, maybe even the project managers, to review the status of that sandbox change in its environment. So if there were any, say, merge conflicts, they would be handled at integration. And then when it's ready for the higher up to review the content changes or the new content, it gets approved from integration into staging. They take a look. It gets assigned to them as a task. They review it. They approve it. And it goes up into production. And now this can be done on a very micro scale. It can be done for individual nodes. It can be done for individual changes to just a single node. Or it could be a much larger feature that you're creating. And the great thing is you no longer have the bottleneck of waiting for your develop branch and your staging server to be ready to do one massive push to production. So with Git flow, if you're familiar with that, we have something called hotfixes. Hotfixes allow you to sort of get a change into production, sort of leapfrogging the standard, merging from the develop branch. But often that's problematic because you haven't done enough testing because you haven't had it in the develop branch, which is sitting out there on dev and staging. So what this allows you to do is take these individual tasks and promote them through this system individually, test them, review them, and promote them as they're ready. So now you might be saying, like I was, I am blown away. How can I get my hands on it? Can I get started? And the answer is sort of, but it's a little bit tricky. Like I said at the beginning, it's not just a module. You're not going to download this and drop it into your modules folder, enable it, and magically all your workflow issues and problems are solved. So what I recommend is setting up a virtual environment to play with this. If you're as interested as I was, you might consider using Proviso, which is you'd use as Vagrant to install a VirtualBox machine that is set up for Drupal. It's specifically built by the Drupal community. And there's lots of good options out there. This is just one that I recommend. And like I said, this is kind of geared more toward the DevOps guys, the programmers, people who are familiar with this. It's just a good way to keep it nice and contained. You're going to need to install Jenkins, Git, all those tools. Some things that, Jenkins especially, you might even be installing your own GitLite server. So you might not want to be doing that all on your local stack. So keep it isolated, test it, and play with it. Here's a few steps to help you get started. So like I told you, there's the WF project out there, which is drupal.org/project/WF. Don't even bother downloading it. Because, of course, that's the first thing I did. I said, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to get started with this. I went to the project page, I downloaded it, I installed it in a fresh install of Drupal 7, and I said, wow, I can't do anything. Use the example profile that Dave Hall has built. It gets you much farther. It gets you much closer to where you need to be. And you can use drushmake to build the Drupal instance that you need to build the management node, the workflow tools management node that manages these jobs, that manages creating those sandbox instances. So you can use drushmake. Just a disclaimer, you've got to use 5x. 4x doesn't include some of the right tools, and 6x doesn't accept some of the arguments in their special configuration that they have. So I'm going to make these slides available on the Drupal Camp Atlanta website, so you can download them and kind of review this if you end up playing with it. Some of these things will save you some time that took me to figure out. And this is a really interesting step. So by default, the example profile will create several rules. This is standard Drupal rules and actions. In the management instance, to connect to Jenkins, which by default is running on localhost port 8080, and it executes these Jenkins jobs. Now here's where actually the bulk of the work begins, because everything else you can do in probably less than an hour, half an hour if you've already figured out some of the quirks. Now I'm going to show you an example of how I've built out this first Jenkins job called create branch. It actually, I put et cetera there. It actually does a lot more than create branch. I'm still working on sort of putting together the best practice sort of examples for each of these Jenkins jobs. But the way it works is that when someone in the management instance creates a new job and assigns it to Bill, Bill gets an email, and after lunch, Bill decides he's ready to start working on it, and he logs in and clicks start. When he clicks start, that rule fires and connects to Jenkins and fires off the create branch job, which has other jobs appended to it, which will fire to actually create an entire sandbox instance, allowing, what did I call him, Bill? Bill, to log in and make his changes, which will be tracked, make any code changes if he's a developer, or even if he's a site builder and he knows how to use features, he can actually create features or modify features and generate the code. And then when he's done and clicks finish, the rest of these workflow steps get invoked to take that branch, merge it back in, and you can see at each step along the way where that code lives, whether it's been merged into the developer integration branch yet, whether it's been approved and moved to staging, and then whether it's been approved and moved out to production, at which point the job is finished. Okay, so I want to give you a demo of basically just this first part. After creating a new job, I put together the Jenkins script to spin up an entirely new sandbox instance and allowing this user to log in and start making their changes. Just a quick peek, this is the Jenkins instance. You can see I'm running on a port 8081. It's because I have Jenkins running in that Proviso so this is the Workflow Tools Management node. I think we can make this a little smaller. Does that look okay? All right, so I'm logged in as user 1. I'm the boss. And I'm going to create a new job. I'm going to make Kevin do some stuff. And Kevin isn't in the system yet, so we're going to assign it to me. I'm the owner, and it's going to be assigned to me. Now here's where the magic happens. As soon as I click Save, Jenkins is going to be notified that there's a new build waiting to happen. Now normally it happens after I click Save and then click Start, but I have it configured right now to kick off. You can see it building right there. And it happens amazingly fast. So if we look at this build history, you can just kind of get an idea for the script that I wrote. Well, you can see it finished successfully there. And if we take a look at, for those people who love staring at code, thank you for the laugh. All right. This is what it looks like. I'm basically running a couple git commands, generate the new branch. I'm using Drush with the custom workflow tools Drush alias, which actually connects to the management node and downloads a custom aliases file that allows me to connect to this new sandbox instance. I'm setting up the settings.php. I'm creating the database and copying it over from prod, copying over the files. And that's it. So this was job 7. Now, with a little bit more configuration, we can actually put a login button here so that Bill or Kevin, whoever's working on it, can actually just click login. It opens up in a new tab and logs them in automatically to the sandbox instance. I haven't gotten that far yet. So let's go ahead and here's production. We're not going to edit production. We're going to go to, by default, it's going to be called, I have it configured to use the job ID, so you can see it's job 7. So I have it configured to, okay, I need like a huge gasp and round of applause if this works, because it's a live demo and that kind of stuff never works. And it's dev.mysite.com:8080. And no. Yes! Thank you, thank you. All right, all those hours without sleep were worth it. Okay, now, if you watch the Drupalcon Prague presentation, it's a little more exciting because he has, you know, an actual fleshed out complete management instance that he's using from Pfizer, where he actually makes the change in the sandbox instance, the change gets tracked, and when he clicks finish, it merges it back into integration, and it gets promoted to staging. I don't have it quite that far yet. But that's as far as I've gotten with it so far, and the structure is there, the tools are there, and I think that we as a community should work together to make this a reality. I'm really excited about it. I hope for you that this is something that you're interested in, and that we can make a reality and sort of improve the workflow practices of the Drupal community. So thank you very much. Now, I'd really love to hear about some of the, I guess, first of all, horror stories about deployment practices that have gone awry, and also some of your suggestions and what you think about this proposal, because it's still very much a work in progress, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Yeah, in the back.
How are treating deployments for Jenkins? Can you do something like Bamboo in place of it?
I'm told that it is agnostic, and that you can use any continuous integration tool that you're familiar with, as long as you can execute those, the Bamboo scripts from rules, then you're all set. Because all this is doing is, I can show you the rule. It's very simple. So when a new job is created, fires off the create sandbox rule. Just don't look at that deprecated part, don't worry about it. And that's all it's doing. It's connecting to to this path on port 8080 and sending that XML fragment to fire off the Jenkins script. So if you can get Bamboo to accept parameters, you're all set. Yeah?
How does this work when you can't avoid content being created on production, for instance, blog comments, sales, or e-commerce sites, and all that kind of stuff?
That's a great question. Actually, that was one of the concerns I had, and I talked to him at Prague about was, is it possible to sort of migrate to using this practice slowly? And what about if there's still users that are modifying content to production, and or those things that are only happening in production, like orders being taken and stuff? And the answer is that yes, you can. In the case where you're going to have some users still working in production, but a different subset of users working from this, it's flexible enough to handle that. Because what happens is that it's always copying, maybe not directly from production, because depending on your site, you might not want, getting Drush hitting your production site that hard, that often. But it's going to be connecting and getting the latest database snapshot from production. So it works just in the same way as if you were refreshing your staging website or refreshing your local website. You're getting that fresh database snapshot, and hopefully there isn't any code coming from master. So, yeah, over here, John.
How does this relate to the CLI initiative? I know CLI solves the configuration headaches in Drupal 8. I thought it was kind of supposed to solve the content headaches as well.
Not sure if anyone else can answer that. I don't believe CMI is going to handle content. It's just configuration.
That's correct. CMI doesn't touch content anymore. Although theoretically, we were talking about this in Holly, theoretically, if you could push your database with the luxury of knowing that your database is holding your content. That's theoretical.
Which we don't want to do. Don't want to push our databases upstream. But yeah. Yes?
So we're talking about pushing content changes. Can it handle database schema changes? If I were to add tables to my local dev branch, could it actually track changes to schema?
Absolutely, through features or hook installs. So I would never want to be altering schema directly in the database anyway, because you have to capture it in code, right? And I guess the answer to your question is no. It's not going to be capturing database schema changes. It's only going to be capturing content changes and stuff that is featurable or can be put into code. So yeah, I mean, if you add a field and you featureize that field change and it's in code, then yes. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
The Git branches that you're talking about, is that separate from your normal development workflow?
Another great question. And I forgot to reiterate each of the questions, so sorry for the people listening to this after the fact. I apologize. So the question is, he asks, what about the Git branches in each of the sandbox instances? And how do they differ from the main develop branch? Now, Workflow Tools actually takes an interesting approach in that each of your, let me go back to the slide here. So in this new hotness, each of those levels, integration, staging, and production, are actually going to be running on their own branch. So integration will run in integration, etc. And so it takes away that standard idea of one develop branch that's blocking the push to production. You know, even if you're using Git flow or whatever strategy, and you can have hot fixes to get stuff into production, that's a good model, but this is better. And so you're actually going to have separate branches for integration, staging, and production. And when one of those jobs gets completed, in the example that I just showed you, job 7 it was, you can see them on branch job 7. I don't know if you can see that. So, it's actually created its own branch, and when it's done, it will merge this branch, job 7, into the integration branch. And then from there, those changes will be, that same branch and those changes will be merged into the stage branch. And then from there, into the master branch. Does that make sense? That would probably need to be scripted in Jenkins or whatever, just to, prune out the, after it's reached stage, or after it's reached production, you probably want to keep some metadata about the job, but you're going to want to delete the sandbox instance, which there's a rule for that, but I haven't written the Jenkins script to accompany it. So you would want to delete the sandbox instance and the job branch. So, yeah. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, comments, heckles? All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. Keep an eye out for this project. It's definitely up and coming. There's going to be a lot more talk about it at Bad Camp, and hopefully some sprinting on it as well out there. So thank you so much for coming and for your great questions.